absolutely one of the best who's ever done it and a wonderful historian for the game, and always an honor for us to talk to him. So joining us right now on the River Islands guest line right here on Willard and Dibs 95.7 The Game is none other than the great Bob Costas. Hello, Bob. Good afternoon. How are you?
Hey, guys. How you doing? You know, I guess, like you, I'm not going to pretend that I'm feeling it as viscerally as a longtime Giant fan or resident of the Bay Area would, but just as a citizen of the game of baseball, it's a sad note about Mike Krukow. What a wonderful guy. And again, I never pretend in any situation to have more of a connection than I actually have. So Krukow and Kuiper and I have crossed paths over the years. I once had lunch in Milwaukee with Mike Krukow, but I'm not going to pretend to be deeply knowledgeable about all the ins and outs of that partnership. But anybody who has spent time around baseball, and, you know, I watch games all the time. You have the package, and you're seeing not just the teams, but you're listening to the broadcasters. And I think it's universal in the broadcasting community that Krukow and Kuiper is one of the great partnerships in the history of baseball broadcasting. There's a difference between a great individual broadcaster and a great team, where one would be so much less without the other. You remove the other, it's more than half that goes away with it. Obviously, Kuiper is very capable, and I'm assuming he's going to remain, but there is no replacing that dynamic and that chemistry. It was one of the best ever.
It was incredible, Bob, and I think about your early days with Tony Kubek when I was just a kid, and your start there, and then Joe Morgan and Bob Bucher. How much was that a big focus of yours to cultivate that sort of symbiosis to bring to the audience?
Oh, very much so. Although there's a big difference between a national game of the week, different teams each Saturday, or just the postseason, as opposed to the voices of a team. And when you talk about the Giants, think of the quality over the years. I mean, historically, you've got Russ Hodges and Lon Simmons, but in more recent years, John Miller, one of the very best ever, young guy like Dave Fleming, and then Krukow and Kuiper. That is some real quality broadcasting, and it's focused on your team for 162 games, maybe a little bit less because some games are on ESPN or Sunday nights on Fox, or on the weekend on Fox or on NBC. But you get the idea. It's day in, day out, night in, night out about your team. And that connection is deeper than the connection fans feel with the local voice of other sports because of the nature of baseball, the pace, even with the pitch clock of a baseball game, and its connection to history. When you hear John Miller now, it's not just this night's game or this season's story. It's the story of all the games you ever heard John Miller call. I mean, the perfect example of that through the years was Vin Scully, incomparable, 67 years as the voice of the Brooklyn and then Los Angeles Dodgers. And I always used to say when people ask me, his broadcasts are simultaneously present and nostalgic. It's about tonight's game, and it's about every game that you ever cared about in the whole history through 2016 of the Los Angeles Dodgers, because he was with them when they arrived in 1958, just as the Giants arrived in San Francisco at the same time. So that relationship between a local baseball announcer, especially if they're good, and their audience, you can't compare it. No matter how good the national broadcaster is, it's apples and oranges.
Bob, I love listening to you talk about tandems as opposed to individuals. And I was thinking earlier, I'm trying to compare these two to something else in sports, and I can't even sort of find it, because there's two things that I think make this even more special, which is A, they are best friends, and B, at times, they have actually been the most popular Giants, even more popular than the players.
Yes.
Can you think of anything else around the world of professional sports where that dynamic has existed?
I can think of great booths like Harry Carey in his prime, before he became beloved for different reasons, but he wasn't as technically good as he had been in St. Louis. Harry Carey and Jack Buck were in the same booth in St. Louis. Red Barber and Mel Allen, after Red left the Brooklyn Dodgers, were in the same booth with the Yankees. But it wasn't the same kind of thing, because they were just dividing up the play-by-play. They're all Hall of Fame great, but that connection isn't the same. Now, when I hang up, I'm going to think of about a half dozen good examples. And then you guys will as well. But there's a difference. Again, different sport, and also, as I've said, difference between national and local. But think of Summerall and Madden, right? Now, Al Michaels in his prime was great with anybody, and he was great with Madden. But Summerall and Madden worked especially because Pat was so terse in a good way. He had a dramatic voice, but he put captions. But he was influenced by Ray Scott, the longtime announcer for the Green Bay Packers, whose calls would be star, Dowler, touchdown, Green Bay.
Yeah.
And so Summerall, with that resonant voice and with the equity that he had with the audience, then along comes Madden. Summerall didn't have to adjust. Summerall's natural style allowed Madden all the room he needed for all his booms and all that other kind of stuff. They were a perfect combination. I'm sure there have been others that we can think of where that relationship works in baseball, and I'm going to kick myself when I think of a half dozen of them as soon as I hang up.
Is part of this, too, like the timing of the era? Because the Summerall Madden one is perfect because that was kind of the beginning of the telestrator, and, Madden can do all his drawings.
Yep.
And the Kruk and Kuiper thing kind of came at the dawn of local cable television where you could stretch out and get to know your audience and do more crowd shots. Is the timing a part of the success of Kruk and Kuiper?
Oh, sure it is. Plus, there was a time when television was secondary to radio. And who knows how good Krukow and Kuiper might have been had they been on the radio. But they were primarily on television. So you didn't have to describe everything. You could put a caption beneath those pictures or tell a story or make an observation about those pictures. Or now here's a shot of a little kid with ice cream all over his face at his first baseball game. Scully loved that stuff. He'd put some story to that. But Krukow and Kuiper were great about the atmosphere at the ballpark, not just commenting about the game itself. What's the atmosphere at the ballpark? And that's a big part of baseball because not every game is a spectacle. It's not like a football game. Not every game is a be-all and end-all. How could it possibly be when you play 162?
The great Bob Costas is with us on Willard and Dibs 95.7 The Game. Bob, I know another thing we wanted to talk to you about is kind of the way you've watched through the years broadcasters, especially working with a team, sort of handle taking the fan on the journey of the ups and downs. And I think those who get in the mind of a fan who doesn't necessarily defend everything the team does, like they go on that emotional up and down with you. And I wonder what your view is on what you've seen through the years, like how that's evolved, but also maybe how it applies to Kruk and Kuiper, who will rub their temples during a game sometimes,
Yeah. Well, of course, they have credibility because they each played the game at the major league level. So their commentary of a certain kind would matter more than a career announcer, no matter how good that career announcer is, because they've got the playing cred. And they've also got all the equity built up over the years, not just because their partnership was so good, but because of their presence. They're part of the soundtrack of your spring, summer, and early fall every year, year in, year out, stretching back to decades. So they had all of that going for them. An interesting thing is that local fans, especially in baseball, always think that their announcer is better than whoever the network announcer is. And they're entitled to that because they don't understand. It's like one guy's making an omelet and the other guy's making a souffle, but you expect it to be the same thing. It's not the same thing. It's just not. And so they always think that Joe Buck and I laugh about this all the time. They are convinced, people hearing exactly the same words of exactly the same broadcast on a national broadcast, especially in the playoffs, fans of both teams are convinced that the network announcer is shortchanging their team, unfair to their team, rooting for the other team. And fans who are just watching the game and don't have an intense rooting interest don't think a thing of it. And you know why? Because it isn't true. But you can't, even some of the people could have a PhD. When it comes to their team, they get irrational. Fan is short for fanatic. It isn't true. But the local announcer has, as I said, they have credibility and connection. And so as long as it's not vicious or unfair, if Krukow and Kuiper are critical of the Giants, either over the course of a disappointing season or in a given game, they've built up the credibility to do that.
And they have obviously the cachet. And the Joe Buck thing's interesting because Giants fans think that he hates the Giants. Until you go back and listen to the Ishikawa home run, which happened against his beloved Cardinals, and Joe loses his mind over that. Bob, I wanted to just ask you about the future of broadcasting. Have we gotten to a spot where you're not going to get another Kruk and Kuip because of the Amazonification and all of the cable and the YouTube and all of the diversifying of media? Are they going to be going the way of the dodo bird, a tandem like this?
I hope it doesn't happen in my lifetime. And of course, my lifetime now has more behind it than in front of it. So I think the old school can hang on until I'm gone, at the very least. But one of the things that's happened is attention spans have been shortened, and you have a lot of people who are digesting bits of games and also, therefore, the broadcast of the games in small nuggets, and you can almost tell. When some of these announcers are calling the game, they're not calling it solely within the context of that moment, which had all the innings that preceded it before the big moment at the end and has something that follows it. They're thinking, how will this call play on the internet? And you can't have a guy losing his mind on a home run in the fourth inning on a Tuesday night in July. Because where does he have to go if he's gone all the way to the top in terms of volume and excitement? What happens in the seventh game of the World Series? Where does he go then? Vin Scully captured every moment. John Miller captured every moment wonderfully without screaming and yelling. But there are a lot of young people now who think that the best call is automatically the most over-the-top and hysterical call. And that is just one more small indication of the ongoing decline of Western civilization.
Bob Costas is with us. Bob, when you just said that your life has a lot more behind it than in front of it, I'm not going to handicap. Well, I looked it up and I'm like, no, you're turning 75 next year. I refuse. That would be correct. I refuse to believe it.
Three-quarter century mark. What are you going to do?
Oh, my gosh.
The alternative, as people say.
Well, it's a good question. Yeah. What are you going to do? 75, that deserves a celebration. What are you going to do?
Well, NBC has been nice enough to bring me back in a very appropriate emeritus role. I did a few little things with the NBA returning, and during this baseball season, a few of the Sunday night games I've been part of, because I'm the bridge between the then and the now. I'm the only person that was there in 2000 when they last had baseball, and in 2002 when they last had the NBA. I mean, Marv Albert is still around, but Marv's a decade or so older than I am. So I was the person that could pass the baton that way and throw in a few notes here and there, hopefully grace notes that remind people of the NBA in the 90s or the heyday of baseball on NBC. And so I hope I've been able to contribute in that way in small doses. And I'll also be a contributor at the Olympic Games in 28 because it's a domestic Olympics, and people still associate me to some extent with all the Olympics that I hosted for NBC. And I've got a great relationship with Mike Krukow. He won the first Bob Costas scholarship at Syracuse University in 1987. And he still tells the story of how I came up to Syracuse to meet him because, according to him, I'd forgotten I said this, I wanted to make sure the first recipient wasn't a knucklehead. And it turns out not only is he not a knucklehead, he's become one of the great all-around sportscasters in network history.
Yeah, I mean, you're giving me all the feels right now. You had me thinking Matty Gukas and Steve Snapper Jones for just a hot second there, the NBA stuff. But the Syracuse, Greg Papa obviously works in our market, and he's, fighting for his life currently right now. And he was a little bit before Mike Krukow in terms of, your time at Syracuse. But what is it about Syracuse that churns out so many of you great broadcasters?
I think once a reputation is established, then it just builds on itself. There's a guy working on a book now. He's spoken with many of us. The title of the book is Sportscaster U, and it's about Syracuse turning out now hundreds of accomplished sports broadcasters. It started with Marty Glickman, who was Jesse Owens' teammate on the 1936 Olympic team and played basketball and football as well as running track at Syracuse. And he became really the first true athlete turned broadcaster, not analyst or color man, but play-by-play man, and a great one. And then Marv Albert followed him, and Dick Stockton followed him. And when I got there in the early 70s, there were a handful, maybe 5 or 6. But now I can't even keep track of how many there are. There was a moment when Tirico was in Milan for the Winter Olympics, and I was filling in, bringing the NBA on the air. So he threw it to me. I threw it to Ahmed Fareed, who was doing part of the pregame show, and then he passed it off for the call of the game to Noah Eagle. Around the horn, all 4 of us Syracuse products.
Amazing. Bob Costas with us here on 95.7 The Game. Bob, you said at the beginning that you and Mike Krukow had lunch in Milwaukee one time. Did I hear that right? What brought that about?
Well, my son, who's now 40 years old and produces games for the Major League Baseball Network, he's going to do the Field of Dreams game in a week or so in Iowa. But when he was a little kid, and when some of the ballparks were on their last moments, I made sure that I took him to those ballparks. So we went to Tiger Stadium, I think, in 1999 before they went off to Comerica Park. And we went to County Stadium. I don't know if they were still calling it County Stadium, but we went to County Stadium in 2000. Same idea, and Euchre and I are pals. So we spent a weekend, my son and I, and they were playing the Giants. So the Giants are staying at the same hotel. So I just happened to walk into the restaurant, and Krukow was sitting there. So we sat down and talked for a while.
Perfect. What'd you order?
I honestly don't remember.
I wouldn't think you did. Yeah, I just thought I'd give that a whirl, but
it would actually. I pride myself on my memory, which is not as sharp as it once was. Still pretty good, but if I actually remembered that, and it wasn't like you're proposing to your wife, or it's dinner at the White House or something. If I actually remembered that. That would be weird.
That'd be a little much, yeah. And you're such an honest person that you didn't just say club sandwich. Like you could have just done that, but you didn't.
I could have.
Yeah. Hey, Bob,
in Milwaukee, it could have been the bratwurst. It
should have been if it wasn't, but indeed. Yeah. Hey, Bob, what a thrill for us, and thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk to us.
Thank you, guys. I hope the remainder of the season for Mike Krukow is something he feels good about, that he can tie a ribbon around it and get all the appreciation from the fans and from his broadcasting colleagues that he deserves.
Well, he's the lead story now when you're, 18 or 19 games under 500. That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a challenge, by the way, for the local broadcaster.
No
it's
joke.
easier to broadcast a good team than it is to a team that's struggling.
Absolutely.